This is the Power Break Podcast number 111, titled, For Such a Time as This. Hi, I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, also known as John Trevino. And we hope that you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. Big Bad Bob, what's going on?
Also known as John Trevino. It's JT, folks.
I almost thought you coordinated your mask with your shirt. That would have been, that's like next level stuff right there.
Oh, no. This is one of those generic masks that I have, and we have a whole pile of them here at the church for people to come in on Sunday. Of course. If they need a mask, we've got a mask for them. But as I pointed out, we're not the mask police.
We are not the mask police. No. That could, wow, yeah. Say mask police really fast, like 5 times, and it turns into something really bad.
I don't want to do that.
I won't do it. Yeah.
No. Okay, let's talk about our listeners. We've had almost 3,500 downloads.
That's insane, man. That's crazy.
Just really thankful for everybody that listens to our podcast. We appreciate it, and we appreciate hearing from you. If you ever get a chance, just knock out an email, send it to jt@bobbrubaker.com. If you have a question, great. If not, just let us know that you're listening. But I know that you are because you're writing those ratings and reviews for us at wherever you download the podcast, and you're helping to spread the word about the Power Break Podcast. So thank you very much. It's a good way to get started with gratitude, right?
It is. You're absolutely right, man. Yep. And that's exactly what the doctor ordered for me this morning. So let's do this.
Well, I'm thankful for you, JT. It's good to, do something like this with my friend. I was listening to a podcast. A person said, if you want to stay younger, do things that you really enjoy doing.
It's awesome. Yeah. No, I look forward to it every single week. Yeah. Always. So, yeah.
And a busy man at that. Well, let me just pose a little question for you. I know that you have many gifts and talents. I mean, you also have that master's degree in psychology.
Yeah, which was, looking back on it, it's probably worthless because I went into public sector work. But yes, I have it.
Okay. Do you ever see yourself as specifically suited by God for some specific needs at this particular time?
Yes, 100%. It's we talked about it a little bit last week. We talked about, or was it? It might have been the week before.
They all run together, JT.
They do. That's a crazy part.
That's a sign that we're getting
time flies when you're having fun. But we talked about, way back when I decided when I was a kid that I was going to learn guitar, and I thought my purpose of doing that was so I could meet women. Right?
Whoa.
And I could be cool, right? And play cool guitar and all that cool stuff. But come to find out, God had that happen back then so I could be involved in worship now.
Yeah.
He fostered that talent, and kind of despite myself, he used it. It was pretty incredible.
Exactly. That's good analogy, yeah.
But yeah, for right now, I've gotten so many compliments on my leadership at work lately. Mm-hmm. Just, everybody calls you for the answer. Everybody, knows that you're always going to be there. Everybody knows that you genuinely care about the people and you don't care about, your promotion or your personal stuff or anything like that. And, it's such a crazy time at work. Like, I know that I am there for that purpose, to provide encouragement, to provide some stability in a time that's not stable, I think
the police officers other police officers are not appreciated, and it's good to have someone on board that they know that is in their camp.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Wow. And I've gotten a ton of compliments from citizens about it too. So it's not like I'm just pro cop and I don't like anybody else. It's like these people came in and they were mad, and this dude was a real big dude. So I'm like, oh man, if he loses it, I don't want to fight this dude.
And JT is no small person now.
No, but this guy was big. And anyway, he came in and he was legitimately upset about something that he perceived happened, when in fact it didn't. Our perception isn't always reality, correct? Mm-hmm. So, but he and I were able to have a great conversation eventually, after he got by the anger and, defensiveness and all that stuff. And, of course, my first instinct is to get defensive because he's talking about something that we did that allegedly wasn't appropriate. By the end of the conversation, man, he said, something? He said, I don't get this usually when I go anywhere. He says, I have contact with a lot of people, but you took the time to allow me to vent.
Whoa. Listen.
Yeah. And you took the time to explain exactly what you were thinking, and you were very honest with me. You weren't worried about, getting sued or not saying the right thing. He said, you talked to me like a person.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and I really appreciate that. So I can't let it get lost on me that God's using me for that,
right.
Even though sometimes it gets lost on me.
You have a tough job. You have a tough job and a tough situation. But, God has prepared you over these 23 years for such a time as this.
Yeah, he absolutely has. How about you, man? I'm guessing you probably wrote this article for a reason.
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, our church is going through this Bible reading program. It's called the Community Bible Reading Journal, and it happens to be in right there. Even today was in Esther chapter 4, which this phrase is taken from the time that we'll talk more about that in a moment. It's found in Esther chapter 4. But, when I think about how God took me through my experiences leading up to the time I was in ministry and the time that I've been in ministry and I've served different churches, and I can see where it's all prepared me for, as the saying goes, such a time as this. So, it's good to see that because we understand that this is not a particular thing for JT and myself. This is particular for all of us, that God has
every
us
one of us
where we are for a specific purpose. And here's the point. None of us are here by accident, and certainly not by random falling into a situation without purpose. God is the one who's orchestrating things as we see them, as we see throughout the scriptures that happens. And it's a job then to prove what is the will of God by being sensitive to the leading of the Spirit of God. As it says in the book of Romans chapter 12, that we are to present our bodies, our lives, as a living sacrifice that's holy and acceptable to God, which is just your spiritual form of worship. But it's also not to be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And he says that you may test and you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. So, what is God's will for you? Right now, he has you where you are for such a time as this.
Yeah, and that testing is so important.
Yeah,
so we don't run off on feelings.
Whoa, that's
feelings.
right.
Feelings
that's
can,
right.
Yeah, send you in a really bad direction. Stop and think. Stop and test it. Okay, why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm here for a reason. Why is that? What is God doing right now? And let's see if I can't get on his page, right? So let's keep talking about this as we turn to your blog. Folks, as always, I'm going to tell you to go to BobBrubaker.com. I actually referred somebody this past week, and they sent me a text later of somebody that I worked with, and they were like, man, you weren't lying. There's a ton of resources. And I got a guy to buy Battle of the Mind, too. I was like, you got to get on there, man. You got to check out this book. But there are a ton of resources there, folks, and I would encourage you to do that. If you want to get his blog, it's free of charge. You just go in, you click that you want to get it on Mondays. MailChimp knocks it out of the park. That guy I will hire to do anything because he's always on time.
He's reliable.
But yeah, for such a time as this, because this is a crazy time. It is a crazy time. Everything seems to be political or politicized because there's an agenda behind the truth, it seems, right? We need to stay focused on why are we here in this moment, in our little slice of life, because we all affect the people around us, right?
And it's real easy to look at the situation and want to get out of this, but consider where you are and why you're there.
Yeah.
For such a time as this is taken from the book of Esther, when Mordecai told his cousin, Queen Esther, that she needed to step up and go to the king and plead on behalf of her people, the Jews. If you want to know more about that, read the book of Esther. It's a really good book, and it really shows the hand of God and his providence. Well, at first, Esther balked because of the fact that anyone who went into the presence of the king without being summoned by him, and to whom he did not hold out his golden scepter when they did come, they were killed.
Man.
So here's Mordecai's response. Mordecai told them to reply to Esther. She was in the house of the queen, and she had sent servants to talk to Mordecai, and he sent word back. So, do not think yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than any of the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish, and who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this.
Such a time as this. Yeah.
What Mordecai was reminding Esther is a good reminder for all of us, namely, that God has us all in a unique place in life for a specific purpose. Too many times we seek to dodge that purpose by one excuse or another. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? JT was looking for some volunteers to step up at the church.
I was.
And everybody was ducking. So, maybe they need to be reminded that they're here for such a time as this. Now, we should remember that if God had Esther in a unique place at just the right time, and that's what you find out in the book of Esther, Esther is right in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
And that's what the book is about, in preserving his people. So, he has you and me in a place, in positions in which we find ourselves for such a time as this. Consider the Apostle Paul was in a Roman prison connected to a guard by 18-inch chain. Paul could have complained, but you look at how he considered his situation as you read Philippians chapter 1, verses 12 through 18, which I encourage you to read. But here's the bottom line. He looked at all the benefits of the fact that he was now in prison. Okay? First of all, the general advancement of the gospel went out. The gospel is known to the imperial guard, those specialized soldiers that move from place to place, who probably the ones who were chained to Paul, so you know that they heard the gospel from Paul.
Yeah.
From not only to them,
know they did,
but also indirectly as Paul spoke to others as they came to visit him, and also as he dictated letters to the churches. And eventually there were conversions, no doubt, among the imperial guard, so much so that Paul concluded the next benefit of his imprisonment was he included this in the 4th chapter when he said that all the saints greet you, especially those of Caesar's household. So evidently there were people that were converted in Caesar's household. That meant some of the imperial guard were converted. They went to serve in Caesar's household
and converted,
and they shared the gospel with other people.
It's awesome.
It's remarkable.
It is.
Okay,
yep.
and so not only that, but it says that the timid believers in Rome became bold in their faith, and he said the gospel was spreading like wildfire, even by those who were opposed to Paul, who thought that preaching the gospel that Paul preached would add torment to his life. And so he says, it's not torment. He says this is actually, he doesn't care. As long as Christ is preached, he doesn't care what the motivation is. Yeah. Anyway, stop and take an assessment of where you are right now, as I wrote here, that you consider the people around you, the responsibilities you have, and you look at the unique opportunities that God has placed in your life. It's not by accident. You are where you are, as we say, for such a time as this.
For such a time as this. One of the things, I always think of Jonah. And I think, Jonah got used for God's purpose despite Jonah.
Yeah.
And I look back on my life, and oftentimes I got used despite despite what John thought was on the agenda. God used me for his. So the question is do you want to be on the team, or do you just want to, be an unwilling participant?
That's about the truth of the matter. Because Jonah was not very willing. He was running away from God, and God used that to capture his attention. Then when he went to Nineveh to preach the gospel, and people were repenting, you would think he would.
He was disappointed.
He was because he hated the people from there.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's good. So anyway, there's a lot more in the article. I encourage you to check it out at BobBrubaker.com. The name of the article is "For Such a Time as This."
So what else is going on, Bob? We got any news this week?
I thought it would be appropriate during this time of all the things that are happening that you described earlier and all the things that upset us. It might be a good time to focus on gratitude. And so I'm recommending my book, The Power of Gratitude, that you can pick up at BobBrubaker.com. And I've just listed some things there for which we can be grateful to God, including His mercy, His grace, and His kindness to us, just considering all the facts that go into that. It should make us very grateful people. And it's very good to know that being grateful is not only good for your spiritual state, it's good for your mental state, and they've proven that it's good for your physical state.
Yeah.
So, The Power of Gratitude is a little book that I wrote, and it's all on BobBrubaker.com. Check it out. And while you're at BobBrubaker.com, click on the sermon links, the sermons I preach here at Christ Community Presbyterian Church. Continuing this summer series in Psalms. What delightful Psalms they are. Psalms of David, and it seems like that dude is always in trouble.
Yeah, I don't have the right to complain.
Well, when you look at that, here's a man, as it says in the Scriptures, that he's a man after God's own heart.
Yes.
He was the sweet singer in Israel. And you just look at it, the majority of the Psalms are written by David.
Right.
Psalms of praise and adoration. Right. He certainly walked with God. He had his moments in the flesh, but he had his moments that he was truly close with God.
Yes.
But you look at that, and this is a good example to us, that God used his moments of deep darkness, of trouble, to draw him even closer, but also David used that time of expressing the greatness of God and trusting in him.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. So
such a beautiful model.
Yes. Yep. And so when you think about this, that God has for us not a life of ease, but there are difficulties. And during that difficulty, we learn to trust him. And David expresses that. And we can identify with David so well as you read the book of Psalms, and knowing that David is not just writing this from flowery beds of ease, but he's writing it from the midst of trouble. Anyway, check it out. The sermon links, the books and everything else, the resources, the blog, and links, of course, to the Power Break podcast. But you're listening to that, so you don't have to click on that. But anyway, all the notes and everything else, you'll find it at BobBrubaker.com. Check it out today.
All right, so here we go. It's time for What About This? That's the time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or Bob, please email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering that on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
I just thought I have a question for you.
Oh, yeah, let's go.
Okay.
Another off-scripter.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
You're good at that, though.
Yeah.
Okay. What has been... you've been with the police force for 23 years.
Yes.
What's been a highlight?
Oh, man. I can look back on my career. I was thinking about the other day how many officers in my career came back and said that whatever training it was, whether it was active shooter or defensive tactics or firearms, all that stuff at one point or another I trained people in, came back and said they were thinking of me when they had something happen.
Oh, wow.
Or something that I told them popped in their head when they were dealing with something. We just had that. The other stuff that's really cool is, the citizens that I was able to train with the active shooter program that we did. And also I can say that there's at least 5 people that I can think of that 100%, if I didn't exist, would not be on this planet right now.
Oh, wow.
That I was able to respond at the time and be able to do something that physically saved their life, whether, it be stopping an assault on them or something like that. And so you look at stuff like that, and it's like, yeah, God used me in a pretty incredible way. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it's been a very rewarding career with everything. When I get distracted by what we call the civilian stuff, I love when Paul calls us soldiers, and no good soldier gets involved in political or civilian matters. Mm-hmm. Every ounce of misery in my career was created by me getting involved with politics or with stuff that wasn't really God's agenda. It was man's agenda. But when you're on God's agenda and you only care about that, there's physical discomfort, and that's usually how you're locked in, there's mental clarity, and there's a lot of times peace that comes with that.
There you go. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Peace.
I think we did. Yeah.
Well, that's good. I just think that highlighting that is important, because I know that you really care about your position, and I know that, sometimes, as you've expressed to me, some of the political things that happen around the police force
it's just not necessary.
Have bothered you, but
Yep.
nevertheless, you've had some really good highlights over the years, and as you mentioned, how rewarding it is when people come back to you and say, hey, JT, well, they call you John, but I guess...
Or they just call me Sarge. Yeah, that seems to be
Sarge.
That's actually the ultimate compliment. Like I have guys that haven't worked for me or at different agencies, and they haven't worked for me in 10 years, but they always refer to me as boss when they call me.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, that to me is the ultimate compliment too. How about you, man? I'm not going to let you off the hook for that question because you have been a pastor since 1982, right?
83 actually, when I was first ordained to ministry.
So,
and yeah, it's rewarding to me is to be able to have the opportunity to minister to families. People, as you see, kids grow up in the church and have the opportunity. Like this week, as we're recording this, I get to have perform a wedding ceremony, officiate a wedding ceremony
awesome, man.
Of a young man that grew up in this church. And
that's even more awesome.
Yeah, and I still keep in touch with a young man that was a young man when he was in the church, and he helped me with my broadcast and everything else.
Okay,
and now he has children. I believe he's on the verge of having grandchildren.
Wow!
And just be able to keep in touch with him and hear about his walk with the Lord and everything else. Yeah. Things that you find rewarding in wherever you're doing. All right, let's get on to question number 1 then.
All right. I think we should do it from a spiritual aspect.
I think that's what we normally do.
We'll keep
We've got a pattern here, folks.
Even though we just went on a total rant. All right. So in the story of Esther and Malachi, the words that Malachi actually
Mordecai is his name.
Mordecai. Did I say Malachi?
Yeah, that's the book of Malachi.
Actually, you know what it is?
It's the Italian in you.
It could have been. It could have been. Yeah. Well, Mordecai also reminds me of that movie. So, anyway, long story. So, the words of Mordecai to her, reminding her that she's in a unique position in life for such a time as this. You were built for this. How can we get a handle on how God has put us in the unique place that we are? And how do we figure out that unique purpose? It was pretty obvious, I think, to Esther. But what about us? Sometimes it's not that obvious, right?
It may not be to us because we're looking to get out of the situation that we're in.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to do that.
So then it begins, if you really want to enjoy being in such a time as this, it begins with a submissive attitude on a daily basis. Now, Jesus said, if anyone come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Again, in Romans chapter 12, it says, I appeal to you, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Well, it continues by looking at each situation. Okay, we begin by saying, Lord, here's my life, take and use it as you see fit. But also looking at each situation when we find ourselves thinking about, how has God led me here? How has he prepared me for this situation? And what purpose would he have for me here? This is where we continue with that same submissive attitude as Paul says, brothers, I do not consider myself to have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining for what lies ahead, I pressed toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. So it begins with submission, but it continues with submission. And realize God has you there. He's the one that's in control. We sometimes look at Romans chapter 12, or skip Romans chapter 8, verse 28, where God works all things together for good to those who love God and to those who are the called according to his purpose. We look at that for comfort in times of difficulty. Well, God is using this. Look at it for every day. God has you where you are. He's the one that's in control. He has you prepared for this moment. Now, what are you going to do with it?
You know, and I want to really talk specifically to some of the people that are in the boat that you and I are in. We have a physical disability, if you want to call it. You can call it whatever you want. But a thorn in our side that's of the physical nature. And, you know, that is something that can easily distract you from what you're supposed to be doing right now, there in your purpose, right? Because we often miss that God put it there for a reason.
That's exactly, yeah.
So, I just want to talk to people specifically about that, because that's one of my struggles. Because it's not like for you, it's not like your disease is going to go away.
Yeah.
You can do things to make it to where you can live a productive life, but it's not going to go away. It's something that you have to constantly be just aware of, and it's uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. And, a lot of times from the emotional stuff, like we can get rid of something in our life and that discomfort goes away. So, but for something like that, that's when you really got to I just found that just leaning into God and just trusting God and just being like, yeah, I know things aren't the way they used to be for me physically. And you can, fill in the blank for whoever you are. But just learning through that, not to be angry or bitter,
right, and realize,
and to be grateful for
even
it.
that God has prepared you for that.
Yeah, that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one sometimes.
Yeah. So He has prepared you, and He prepared you for such a time as this, and that time would include all the events of life, including the frailties of life and and what you said, the things that we would consider thorns in the flesh that we have to deal with. Yeah. Good point, JT. Extra points for JT today, folks. Mark that out.
Oh, man. Are you going to increase my pay, aren't you?
If I could, I would triple your pay, JT.
Hey, thanks, buddy. I hear the same thing at church. All right, so question number 2 from a mental aspect. I get that we need to get out of the complaining mode, and we really talked about that a lot, because complaining can really drag you down like just an anchor around your neck, right? And we need to get out of that, and we need to and stop, getting into that seeking comfort thing, because all of us want to do that. We don't want to be uncomfortable, and I see that you're born like that, because my kids are like that. I'm like, listen, I know it's comfortable just to sit there and eat snacks, but that's not your job. Your job is to get up and get active. But how do we do it from a mental aspect? How do we see our situation as an opportunity to be used by God? How do we keep focused on that from a mental aspect?
All right. We say it all the time. It's the big D word, discipline. It's not
discipline.
Automatic or something
Love
for
it.
which we must not struggle. It's something we struggle with all the time. Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, whatever gain I had, I counted loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. And for His sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I might gain Christ. Again, we go back to Philippians chapter 1, where Paul said, some preach Christ from envy and rivalry, others from goodwill, the latter out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then, he says? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I will rejoice. Yes, he says, and I will rejoice.
Yes. He puts a big period on it. Yep.
That's a discipline. And so that's when he says in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 31, that he says, I need to die daily. And that's what it's all about. So it's discipline.
Yep.
It's discipline. Say, no, I won't get in that complaining mode. God has me for such a time as this to be right here.
Right.
I am as much in God's plan where I am today as Esther was in the days of King Ahasuerus.
Yes. Yes. These are stories in the Bible about real people that affected the real people around them.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what we are.
Yeah.
They're
narratives to describe what God did in that day. Yeah. And you know what? The Bible tells us that God doesn't change.
That's right.
And so we can count on Him having us where we are today for a specific purpose, for such a time as this.
Yep. That's awesome stuff, man. So good. All right. So for the third question, we're going to turn to the physical aspect, which I'm sure everybody predicted.
Yeah.
What's up with the menthol and athletic performance in the heat, man? I'm just going to let you talk about it because, sometimes I think things are quackery and sometimes I don't.
I thought it too. It's about when I noticed this. Okay. Menthol, it's pretty interesting data, the use of menthol as a mouth rinse before, during, and after a workout. Now, menthol has been used in all kinds of rubs to bring a cooling effect.
Yes.
And in mouthwash, it kind of brings a sense of clean and zing, if you please. Now the research has found that Olympic training athletes for this year's Olympics that didn't happen but are scheduled for next year, for the heat of Tokyo, by the way, a swish through the mouth of menthol can actually enhance performance.
What?
Legally. Now, here's the data.
That's the beautiful part.
From Jason Koop from CTS Training. He said, sensing your body is cooler than it actually is, you actually run harder, farther, and theoretically at least, you could otherwise in hot environments, as your internal protective mechanisms against overheating are at least temporarily chemically overridden by the sense of menthol in your mouth.
Incredible.
Now, your body is quite literally being tricked into thinking it's cooler than it actually is, though your core temperature and muscular temperature are unaltered or even or maybe even elevated. The latter point is particularly salient, of course, but your core temperature is not altered by menthol. Okay, it's a trick in every sense of the word. Now, here's the point. It was noted that rinsing to the top, rinsing your mouth out with menthol has been a winner in both the research and practical realm, particularly among endurance athletes. He says, running performance and time to exhaustion tests have shown to improve between 3 and 9% with menthol rinses.
That's humongous.
So next year when you do this, the Ragnar,
menthol myself.
You have a little pouch with some menthol mouthwash, and every once in a while, don't swallow it, just rinse your mouth out, spit it out, and boom, there goes JT.
Number one, I'm old enough to where you never hear that. Boom, there goes JT. That doesn't happen anymore. But I'll try it for sure.
Okay, so here's the point. The caution is this is not a substitute for good hydration, both before, during, and after a workout. But it seems to indicate that a menthol mouthwash rinse can fool your body into feeling cool, which will enhance your performance. Legally.
It's a beautiful thing.
I am going to start taking menthol with me on a bike ride.
And you know what's the best part? Is everybody's going to have squeaky fresh breath, which makes me happy. Not that anybody notices, because we're always wearing masks now.
Well, it takes discipline to use menthol the right way, or as we were talking about in every other thing, because discipline does make the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at BobBrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 111.
And submit your questions by email to jt@bobbrubaker.com and listen for Bob's answer or my answer on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Real quick, let's step in here and just remind you that I have that book on my website called The Power of Gratitude. It will do you well during this COVID time and all the other situations going on to develop a real attitude of gratitude. It will help you mentally, physically, and, of course, spiritually. Check it out. The book is called The Power of Gratitude. You'll find the link to it at BobBrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast. And check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at BobBrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.